Mr. Scott, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for coming. I'm going to do something a tiny bit unusual. I have a whole series of questions I'd like to actually read first. That will also put them in the record in both official languages, and then we'll start to get to some of them, the most important ones, probably in the second round. I'd appreciate if you could consider some of them providing written reasons, written answers if we don't get to them. But that's something we could discuss later. So I'm going to just reference them by numbers. First, assuming that the CRTC was consulted or otherwise worked with the Minister or its officials on the new division in the Act that you've described, is the present text of C-23 what the CRTC understood would be legislated, or are there differences? If so, which? Second, is it the case that current technology would permit technologically sophisticated persons to use their own call delivery systems consisting of their own server, intermediary proxy servers, and so on to conduct a calling operation without needing to use any calling service provider as defined by these new sections? And if so, does that mean such persons would not be registered in the new system, let alone caught by it, if they're engaging in voter suppression calls? Third, if there is the just described coverage gap, does it stand to reason that other preventative measures and or effective investigative tools, notably on the part of the Commissioner for Canada Elections, such as the power to seek a judicial order compelling testimony, and such as access to all receipts for National Party expenses, campaign expenses, will be needed to deal with such voter suppression calling that takes place outside this CRTC overseen system? Fourth, a lot of these will now be technical. Section 348.01, are text messages or similar communications like BBMs covered by the definition of calls? Number 5, 348.01 again, under voter contact calling services definition, one purpose covered is indeed the raising of funds. So 2 sub-questions. Could you confirm that calls made within the new fundraising exemption for campaign expenses found in section 376 sub 3 of the Act are covered by this voter caller contact services definition? Secondly, 2, within this question 5, to what extent will the CRTC oversee the compliance of parties with the new fundraising exemption, as the Minister has claimed it will in the House? Number 6, 348.03 and .07 uses the language, a person enters an agreement, and the question is, should this not read a person or a group enters an agreement? Because in the definition, political parties and other collective entities are defined as within the category of groups, and if they're not put there, will this end up meaning they're not covered by these duties in those 2 sections? Number 7, there's 2 pairing of provisions, and I'm wondering if there's a gap. There may not be. 348.08 and 348.09 together, 348.18 and 348.19 together. Is there a gap here that means that groups, including political parties, do not have to account for live calls if those live calls are made using their own internal services? If so, is an amendment needed? 8. 348.11. Could you confirm that the voter contact registry will not contain phone numbers called through voter contact calling services or through the internal services of groups like political parties, and will also not contain scripts and recordings, because there's no duty to provide either of them to the CRTC? And for maximum effectiveness, should both of these be required to be retained by the calling services providers, as we know, for a designated period, but also conveyed to the CRTC to be part of the voter contact registry? 9, there's nothing explicit in the voter contact registry provisions on either a CRTC duty to retain information or a period of retention. So the question is this duty implicit? If so, for how long? And does the CRTC already have policies that would apply? And secondly, should the duty to retain be made explicit, and if so, for what length of time? And is the 10 years suggested by the former Chief Electoral Officer Kingsley a good period? 10, there are no tagline requirements in the bill. Should all calls have to have specified caller information that must be included in scripts and recordings and also conveyed for inclusion in the voter contact registry? 11, calling service providers must only retain data for 1 year. Should this be longer? If so, for how long? 12, should there be an express power, as recommended by the Chief Electoral Officer, for the Commissioner to apply for a judicial order for any person or group or calling service provider to retain data beyond the specified period, should the Commissioner believe he may need access to that data as part of an investigation? 13, is the voter contact registry public, or is it only the registration notices referenced in 348.12 that are public? 14, is the voter contact registry accessible at will to either the Chief Electoral Officer or the Commissioner for Canada Elections, or is access limited by 348.15, which requires a request only from the Commissioner and using a necessity test? 348.15, according to this section, the Commissioner must ask for documents or information. Must the Commissioner know exactly what document or information he needs or she needs? Within the same question, there's no explicit proactive duty on the part of the CRTC to inform the Commissioner of any suspicions so as to trigger a request from the Commissioner. May the CRTC do so? Should the duty be made explicit? And in any case, will the CRTC be likely to discern any problems that would give rise to suspicion given the nature of the oversight regime? Is the threshold too high for the Commissioner? It's a considers necessary threshold. Should it be considers helpful? And should the bill be amended to give the Commissioner unfettered access to the voter contact registry? Now, finally, there's no express clause. I'm going to skip two and I'll come back to them in a second. There's no express clause dealing with extraterritorial service providers. Should there be? And so we'll come back to these questions in the second round. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.